I should probably thank Martha for harassing me. If it wasn't for her obsession with my houseboat, I never would have discovered she'd been stealing money from the entire neighborhood. 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. 3 police boats surrounding my perfectly legal floating home while Martha Hendricks, dressed in tennis whites, stands on her dock pointing at me like I'm some kind of water pirate. Her voice cuts through the morning mist via bullhorn. That floating trailer is destroying our property values. Here's what really gets me. This woman spent 3 years terrorizing neighbors over lawn ornament violations, all while systematically embezzling $127,000 from the very community she claimed to protect. But Martha made one critical mistake. She assumed the divorced guy living on a houseboat would be easy to intimidate. What she didn't know was that I had time, tech skills, and absolutely nothing left to lose. What would you do if your HOA tried to ban you from your own lake? Let me back up. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm 45 and 6 months ago, my 20-year marriage ended in a divorce that left me with half my savings and a serious need for a fresh start. My grandfather's old A-frame cabin on Lake Serenity had been sitting empty since he passed 2 years earlier. I'd inherited it, but the place needed serious work. New roof, updated electrical, foundation issues. That's where the houseboat comes in. I'm a software developer, but I've always been handy. So I figured, why not build myself a floating home while I renovated the cabin? The smell of fresh sawdust mixing with coffee became my new normal. And let me tell you, waking up to loons calling across still water beats traffic noise any day. Lake Serenity is a decent-sized community, about 200 homes scattered around the shoreline. Most people get along fine. Most people. Then there's the Pineview Shores HOA controlling about 60% of the lakefront properties. That's where Martha Hendricks rules her little kingdom. Martha moved here 3 years ago after retiring from some bank management position. Picture your stereotypical HOA president. Blonde hair that never moves, perfectly manicured nails, and the kind of smile that never reaches her eyes. Here's the thing about Martha. She's got a pattern. In 3 years as HOA president, she's systematically targeted anyone who doesn't fit her vision. The Martinez family got harassment letters because their dock decorations were too colorful. Old Mr. Peterson faced daily complaints about his unkempt yard, even though the man's 83 and doing his best. My first week on the water, she shows up with her clipboard and that fake smile. Mr. Morrison, I'm sure you understand that your little boat project creates concerns about precedent and community standards. I explained that my grandfather's property predates any HOA jurisdiction, that everything I'd built was completely legal under county maritime codes. Her smile got tighter. Well, we'll just have to see about that, won't we? That's when the harassment started. Daily photo sessions of my boat. Noise complaints every time I ran my generator, which was solar-powered in silent 90% of the time. She'd show up at community meetings talking about certain individuals disrupting the peaceful lake lifestyle we all cherish. What I didn't know yet was that her obsession with my houseboat was about to uncover something much bigger than petty HOA power games. 2 weeks into Martha's photo surveillance campaign, she decided to escalate. I'm out on the water one morning testing solar panel adjustments when I hear the distinctive whine of multiple boat engines approaching fast. Coast Guard cutter, County Sheriff's Marine unit, and Martha following behind in her pristine pontoon boat like she's leading some kind of naval parade. The Coast Guard lieutenant pulls alongside. Sir, we've received reports that your vessel may be operating in violation of maritime safety regulations. I invited them aboard for a full inspection. Here's where Martha's plan backfired spectacularly. When you build something yourself, you tend to go overboard on safety features. My little floating home had redundant bilge pumps, professional-grade electrical systems, Coast Guard-approved navigation lights, fire suppression, the works. 20 minutes later, the lieutenant's shaking my hand. Mr. Morrison, this is some of the finest craftsmanship I've seen in 15 years of inspections. Mind if I ask who did the electrical work? That would be me, I said, watching Martha's face turn 3 shades of red from her pontoon boat. But here's the mini twist that changed everything. While the officer was writing up his glowing report, he mentioned that they'd received several complaints about my boat over the past month, not just from Martha. Someone had been filing reports under different names. That's when I realized this wasn't just about HOA power games. This was harassment, and it was documented. That afternoon, I filed my own report with the county clerk's office. Turns out there's this beautiful thing called selective enforcement that can completely void HOA covenant restrictions. When an HOA targets specific residents while ignoring identical violations from their preferred members, they lose their legal authority to enforce any restrictions at all. I started documenting everything. Timestamp photos, audio recordings where legal, written summaries of every interaction. My software background came in handy. I created a database that would make a detective jealous. Date, time, witnesses, exact quotes, cross-references to HOA bylaws. Word travels fast in a small lake community. Within a week, I had 3 different neighbors quietly approaching me with their own Martha stories. Mrs. Chun from the East Shore reported my grandson's kayak as an unlicensed watercraft. The Martinez family said she tried to ban our family reunions because we had too many cars. Each story added another piece to a pattern of selective enforcement that would make any civil rights lawyer salivate. But Martha wasn't done escalating. 2 days after the Coast Guard inspection, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Community center was packed, maybe 60 people in folding chairs. Martha stood at the front with a presentation that would have made corporate America proud. Charts, graphs, property value projections, the whole 9 yards. Fellow residents, she began, voice dripping with false concern. We face a precedent that could fundamentally alter our community's character. If we allow non-traditional watercraft to proliferate, what's next? Floating parties, commercial enterprises, floating trailer parks? The crowd murmured. Some nodded along, worried about their property investments. When it came time for questions, I stood up, stayed calm, kept my voice level. Martha, could you please explain why my legally built Coast Guard approved houseboat violates community standards, but the Henderson's pontoon boat dock, which extends 15 feet past the legal setback line, doesn't warrant any HOA attention? Dead silence. Martha's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She hadn't expected me to do my homework. Document every interaction with your HOA. Selective enforcement is their legal Achilles heel. That night, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about my right to live on my boat anymore. This was about standing up to the kind of petty tyrant who ruins communities one harassment campaign at a time. Martha's response to public embarrassment was predictable. Double down and escalate. 3 days after the community meeting, I found a certified letter announcing an emergency HOA vote on new watercraft restrictions. 30 days notice for a vote that would ban all non-traditional watercraft from HOA-controlled properties. Here's where Martha made her second strategic mistake. She assumed everyone would fall in line with her property values over everything approach. What she didn't count on was the old-timers who'd been living on this lake since before HOA stood for anything more than a few neighbors agreeing to keep their docks maintained. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something Martha had never bothered with, actually talking to people. Not campaign speeches, just conversations over coffee, chance encounters at the boat launch, friendly chats while people worked on their docks. Bob Peterson, the 83-year-old widower Martha had been harassing about his yard, turned out to be a retired electrician. Son, he told me while we watched his granddaughter catch bluegill off his dock. I've got 3 fishing boats, 2 jet skis, and a pontoon boat. According to Martha's new rules, I'd have to get rid of everything except the pontoon. Been fishing this lake for 40 years. Ain't stopping now. The Martinez family had similar concerns. Their extended family gatherings included kayaks, canoes, and a couple of fishing boats that technically didn't meet Martha's traditional watercraft definition. We came here to enjoy the lake with our children and grandchildren. When did that become controversial? But here's the mini twist that really changed the game. While I was building grassroots opposition to Martha's vote, I decided to do some research into HOA finances. My divorce had taught me that when someone's being irrationally aggressive about money matters, there's usually a reason. The HOA bylaws required financial transparency. So I requested copies of the last 3 years' budgets and expenses. What I found made me understand why Martha was so desperate to maintain control. The numbers didn't add up. Lake beautification, $40,000 over 2 years. But I'd driven around the entire lake. What beautification? Maintenance, $25,000 annually. I'd seen those docks. They looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Administrative consulting fees, $18,000 to something called Lakefront Property Management Solutions. A quick Google search revealed that was owned by Martha's brother-in-law. Most HOA boards violate financial transparency laws. A simple audit request can expose years of mismanagement. The night of the vote, the community center was packed beyond capacity. Martha had prepared another presentation complete with before and after photos of other lakes that had maintained their standards. But when it came time to vote, something beautiful happened. Bob Peterson stood up with his walker and addressed the room. I've been living on this lake since 1987. Back then, we helped each other with dock repairs and shared fish stories over beer. Now, we're voting on whether my fishing boat fits someone's idea of traditional. This isn't about property values, folks. This is about whether we're still neighbors or just taxpayers in somebody else's kingdom. The vote failed. 47-23. Martha's face went through a color spectrum I didn't know was humanly possible. But losing the vote wasn't the end of Martha's escalation. It was just the beginning of her desperation phase. Within a week, she'd hired a lawyer from the city with partners who charged $400 an hour to write threatening letters. The letter arrived on expensive letterhead full of legal terminology designed to intimidate. They were threatening to sue me personally for creating a public nuisance and interfering with HOA governance. They wanted my boat gone within 30 days or face legal action. I read the letter twice, then did something that probably wasn't my smartest move, but felt incredibly satisfying. I laughed out loud. See, threatening to sue someone who's been through a contentious divorce is like threatening to diet someone who's already lost 50 pounds. I'd been through legal hell and survived. This was just Tuesday. But Martha's lawyer had made the same mistake she kept making. They assumed I hadn't done my homework. While they were researching ways to attack my boat, I'd been documenting every code violation, every selective enforcement incident, every financial irregularity I could find. Martha's expensive lawyers spent 3 weeks researching every possible angle to attack my houseboat. What they found instead was the kind of irony that makes you believe in cosmic justice. My boat was not only completely legal, it was better built and more compliant than half the structures around the lake. But their research had an unexpected side effect. When you hire lawyers to dig deep into property regulations, sometimes they find things you didn't want them to find. They'd been trying to prove my boat violated waterway regulations. So they'd ordered a comprehensive survey of the entire lake. And right there on page 37 was a detailed analysis showing that Martha's pristine dock extended illegally into public waterway by 12 feet. That same week brought even better news. The HOA board elections were coming up, and thanks to Martha's heavy-handed tactics, I had more support than I'd expected. Bob Peterson nominated me himself. Jake's the first person in years to stand up to the bullying around here. Maybe it's time we had someone on the board who actually reads the bylaws. Election night at the community center felt like a block party. People brought homemade cookies and coffee that didn't taste like it was brewed in a gym sock. When they announced the results, Jake Morrison, 78% of the vote. The applause lasted so long I thought my ears would ring. Martha sat in the front row looking like someone had just told her Christmas was cancelled. My first act as a board member was to call for a forensic audit of HOA finances. Not because I suspected anything major. Honestly, I figured we'd find some sloppy bookkeeping and maybe a few questionable purchases. What I didn't expect was to uncover the kind of financial irregularities that would make a federal prosecutor interested. The forensic accountant I hired, Sarah Chen, who'd helped me navigate my divorce finances, started finding problems immediately. Contracts awarded without proper bidding. Services paid for but never performed. Expense receipts that didn't match bank records. But the real smoking gun was hiding in plain sight. Those administrative consulting fees I'd noticed earlier, $18,000 annually to Martha's brother-in-law's company for property management consulting. But when Sarah dug deeper, she found invoices for services like lake water quality testing and community space optimization consulting. Fancy words for services that were never actually provided. When an HOA threatens legal action, demand they prove their own compliance first. Bullies rarely follow their own rules. The preliminary audit findings were damning enough that I had to make a decision. Keep this quiet and let Martha resign gracefully or push for full accountability. The old me might have chosen the easy path. But this wasn't just about me anymore. Mrs. Martinez deserved better than years of harassment. Bob Peterson deserved to fish his lake without harassment complaints. Besides, Martha had made this personal when she tried to destroy something I'd built with my own hands. Martha's response to losing the election was predictable. Escalate again. She started showing up at my dock uninvited, demanding to see proof that my audit was legitimate. She filed complaints with the county about my harassment of HOA board members. She even tried to organize a petition to overturn the election results. The final straw came when she hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my personal life. 3 months into the forensic audit, Sarah Chen called me with news that changed everything. I was sitting on my deck watching morning mist rise off the water when my phone rang. "Jake, you need to sit down for this. I found evidence of systematic embezzlement totaling $127,000 over 3 years. The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the deck planks. Come again? Martha didn't just pad contracts or approve questionable expenses. She set up an elaborate scheme using shell companies, fake invoices, and diverted payments. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is organized theft. The details were staggering. Those lake beautification projects, the money went to companies that existed only on paper. The administrative consulting fees, payments to Martha's relatives for services never rendered. But the masterstroke was her emergency fund management system. Martha had convinced the previous board to authorize her to move HOA funds into higher-yield investment accounts. What she'd actually done was transfer money into accounts she controlled, then use forged documentation to show the funds were still earning interest. Jake, she used the Postal Service to mail fraudulent financial statements to board members. That makes this federal mail fraud. We're not talking about HOA violations anymore. We're talking about felony charges. The legal implications hit me like a cold wave. Embezzlement from an HOA isn't just civil liability. It's criminal fraud. HOA embezzlement is a federal crime if postal mail is involved. But here's what really got my attention. Sarah had discovered that Martha hadn't been working alone. The property management company that provided oversight services had been complicit through willful negligence. There's more. I found similar patterns at 7 other HOAs where Martha provided consulting services over the past 5 years. This isn't her first rodeo. The scope was breathtaking. Martha had been running a systematic operation targeting small HOAs with insufficient financial oversight. That evening, I faced a choice that would define everything that came next. Sarah had prepared a comprehensive evidence package. The district attorney's office had confirmed they were interested in prosecution. I could have accepted Martha's panicked offer to resolve this privately. She'd called that afternoon, voice shaking, offering to repay the stolen funds and resign quietly if I agreed to drop the investigation. Part of me was tempted. But sitting on my deck that night, watching stars reflect off the water my grandfather had fished for 60 years, I realized this was bigger than personal peace. The next morning, I called Sarah and told her to proceed with criminal charges. Building a case against someone who's been systematically stealing from a community requires more than just evidence. It requires a team. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled what Sarah jokingly called the Lake Serenity Avengers. Sarah Chen became our financial detective. Mike Rodriguez, a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, joined our team. The county prosecutor, Patricia Williams, had built her career on white-collar crime. When Sarah presented our evidence package, Patricia's eyes lit up. We've been looking for a case like this to demonstrate that HOA corruption has real consequences. But the real strength came from community members who'd been quietly documenting Martha's harassment for years. Bob Peterson had kept meticulous records of every noise complaint, every threatening letter. Mrs. Martinez had photos of citations Martha had placed on cars during their family gatherings. Fighting HOA corruption requires a team approach. Forensic accountants, lawyers, and documentation specialists working together. 2 days before our evidence was scheduled to go public, Martha made the kind of desperate move that turns misdemeanor corruption into federal obstruction of justice. I discovered it purely by accident when I stopped by the HOA office. The office door was propped open and I could hear someone frantically typing. Martha was hunched over the desktop computer, completely absorbed. "Martha," I called out. "Everything okay?" She jumped like I'd fired a gun, spinning around with wide-eyed panic. Her laptop was open beside the desktop computer, and I could see file transfer windows on both screens. "Jake, you startled me. I'm just cleaning up some old files, organizing things for the transition." Here's the mini twist that sealed her fate. Martha thought she was deleting evidence, but my IT background meant I understood something she didn't. When you delete files from a computer, they don't actually disappear. An HOA policy required automatic cloud backups of all financial records. She was essentially creating a perfect digital trail of obstruction of justice in real time. I played dumb, chatted for a few minutes, then casually mentioned that my software consulting business included data recovery services. It's amazing what you can recover from computers these days. Even when people think files are completely gone, there are usually traces somewhere. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. That afternoon, I called Patricia and Sarah with an update. "We need to secure those computers now. Destroying evidence during an active investigation is a federal crime." By evening, FBI agents had seized the HOA office computers. The forensic computer analysis revealed exactly what we'd suspected. Martha had attempted to delete 3 years of financial records, email communications, and contract documentation. But the cloud backups preserved everything, and the deletion attempt itself became additional evidence of criminal intent. Martha's special meeting to address my supposed vendetta was scheduled for a Thursday evening. What she didn't know was that Patricia Williams had coordinated with local media to make this the most public HOA meeting in county history. By 6 p.m., the community center parking lot looked like a news convention. 3 local TV stations, 2 newspapers, and a radio reporter had all shown up. Martha arrived fashionably late, probably expecting her usual audience of 30 neighbors. Instead, she walked into a room packed with over 150 people, including FBI agents, county prosecutors, and enough media to make CNN jealous. The look on her face was priceless. Her crisis management consultant had prepared a presentation claiming that I had manipulated the community through false allegations stemming from divorce financial stress. Here's the mini twist that ended her campaign permanently. While Martha's team was setting up their defense presentation, Channel 7's investigative reporter was live tweeting the forensic accountant's findings. By the time Martha stood up to address the room, half the audience was reading about her embezzlement schemes on their phones in real time. "Fellow Lake Serenity residents," Martha began, her voice shakier than I'd ever heard it. "We're here tonight because certain individuals have chosen to pursue personal vendettas rather than community harmony." A reporter in the back row raised her hand. "Mrs. Hendricks, can you comment on the FBI's investigation into $127,000 in allegedly embezzled HOA funds?" Martha's consultant whispered urgently in her ear, but she was beyond listening to advice. "Those allegations are completely fabricated by someone who clearly has mental health issues stemming from his recent divorce." That's when Channel 4's investigative team played their ace card. They brought their own forensic accountant. "Mrs. Hendricks, we've independently verified the financial irregularities. Could you explain why payments to your brother-in-law's company increased 400% during your tenure as HOA president?" The room went dead silent. Martha's mouth opened and closed. Her consultant was frantically shuffling papers. But Martha was done listening to professional advice. 3 months of mounting pressure, failed cover-up attempts, and community backlash had finally broken her composure completely. Fine. You want the truth? Jake Morrison has been harassing me since the day he moved that floating trailer park onto our lake. He systematically destroyed everything I worked to build here. I took some money, yes, but it was for the community. Everything I did was to protect property values from people like him who don't understand what this community is supposed to represent. Her consultant literally put his head in his hands. Patricia Williams was furiously taking notes. The FBI agents were exchanging glances that probably meant case closed. You think this is about money? This is about standards. This is about keeping the wrong kind of people from ruining everything we've built. And there it was. The mask finally came off completely. 3 months of pretending this was about community standards and property values, and she just admitted it was about keeping the wrong kind of people away. The community reaction was immediate and devastating. People started standing up and walking toward the exit, not in support of Martha. They were leaving because they couldn't stomach watching someone destroy themselves so publicly. Mrs. Martinez was the first to speak after Martha's confession. I've lived on this lake for 15 years. My family has always been welcome here until you decided we were the wrong kind of people. You stole our money and our peace of mind. Bob Peterson struggled to his feet with his walker. Martha, I've been fishing this lake since before you were born. It's not your lake. It's not your community. And it sure as hell isn't your money. Public accountability often prevents future corruption better than private settlements. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. By the time the meeting officially ended, Martha was sitting alone at the front table while news crews packed up their equipment. The next morning, arrest warrants would be issued. But that night, Martha's reign of terror ended not with legal documents, but with a community finally seeing exactly who she really was. The county commissioner's monthly meeting 3 weeks later was supposed to be routine business. Instead, it became the most attended public meeting in county history. Word had spread through social media and local news coverage that Martha's case would be presented publicly with full evidence disclosure and community impact statements. By 6 p.m., the community center was packed beyond fire code capacity. Over 300 people crowded into a space designed for 150. Martha arrived with her defense attorney. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. The perfectly coiffed hair was showing gray roots. The manicured nails were bitten down. Commissioner Janet Davis called the meeting to order. Due to the significant community impact and ongoing criminal investigation, we're providing a public forum for evidence presentation in the Lake Serenity HOA corruption case. Martha's attorney spoke first, attempting damage control. My client acknowledges certain financial irregularities, but maintains that any discrepancies were the result of poor bookkeeping rather than criminal intent. Then Patricia Williams stood up. Commissioner Davis, the state has prepared criminal charges, including embezzlement, mail fraud, obstruction of justice, and racketeering in connection with a multi-HOA fraud operation spanning 5 years and 7 communities. The murmur that went through the crowd was like a wave building before it crashes on shore. But the real moment of truth came when Commissioner Davis invited community impact statements. One after another, Martha's victims stood up to tell their stories publicly. Mrs. Martinez described years of harassment over her family's colorful celebrations. Bob Peterson talked about being intimidated for fishing the lake he'd loved for 40 years. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with 3 years of evidence distilled into a 15-minute presentation that told the complete story. But instead of starting with technical details or financial charts, I started with something simpler. This all began when I built a houseboat to live on while renovating my grandfather's cabin. It was completely legal, fully inspected, and harmed no one. But it didn't fit Martha Hendrick's vision of what our community should look like. So she called the police. What she didn't know was that her harassment campaign would expose the largest HOA corruption case in county history. Every time she escalated against my legal houseboat, she created more evidence of her own crimes.